Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Shift Church. If this is your first time here, we would love it if you would scan this QR code or the one back out the Welcome Center. If you fill out the Connect card, we will send you some free Opus coffee. And make sure you check out the Coffee with Joe section because you can enjoy that cup of Joe with Joe himself, either in person or online. He can meet you whenever, wherever, so you can ask all the questions that you want or need to know about Shift. Our small groups are launching now. We have a midweek in-person group, online group, student group, games group, and our new First Magnitude group. Make sure you scan the QR code, fill out the small group form, and a leader will contact you. Our next online-only service will be February 18th, so don't show up because you'll come here and you'll be locked out and cold and sad, and that's no fun. But our teaching will go live on YouTube at 11 a.m. And that's all I have for you guys today. So let's start our new series, Taboo.
Last Sunday, we packed up all of our stuff and left a space that helped launch some pretty amazing things, and we talked about that. I wasn't ready for the emotion of the morning. You know, I mean, I had just tried to prepare myself for the whole week, and like packing everything up, and you kind of deal with it. But just walking through the empty building, I just kind of felt like I think I put the picture in there. Did I put the picture in there? I did. I felt like that. I felt like, the end of Fresh Prince, just kind of like standing there. And that's exactly, as I was trying to think about how do I describe this, I'm like, that's it right there. I knew it would be tough, but I wasn't ready for the intensity of that morning. And then after we got done, I ran home, I showered, I packed, and then I drove to Tallahassee with Equality Florida. And if you're not aware of who Equality Florida is, they are the state's largest advocacy group for LGBTQ rights and other stuff too, but that's the main focus. And I went with something called Parenting with Pride. Parenting with Pride, there's a group of parents behind that, and I'm part of that team. And we went to Tallahassee to meet with legislators about and ready to testify committee hearings about against all of these really atrocious laws that are coming down. Like flag ban, allowing minors to work full-time hours, lowering the age to buy weapons of war, which is funny to me because at 18 years old, we have lots of seniors at 18, and they're not trusted to choose what books they can read, but they're okay to carry AR-15s. Criminalizing sex ed in schools, and then there's so many more. So it was like 72 hours of just like go, go, go. Like there wasn't a quiet moment to be had. But one of those moments, I think it was like Tuesday evening, and we were just kind of worn out, and I went back to the hotel room. I didn't turn anything on and just kind of sat to just kind of decompress and think about what was going on. And I kind of had like a little bit of an epiphany. Just like this aha moment where I realized that all of the stuff that we were dealing with, the move and the laws and everything, it was all related. It was all connected. And it's all tied to something called Christian supremacy. If you're new, I will say this before we go on. If you're new, I would love to meet with you. I want to welcome you to like the first time here, and if you go back there and click that QR code. There's a section, Meet with Me, and I'd love to take you to coffee. Today, we kick off our annual February series called Taboo. Taboo is 4 weeks where we kind of dive into topics that you typically won't hear a church talk about. We're not afraid to wrestle with the most difficult topics. And so today we're going to be talking about something called Christian Supremacy. Now, Christian supremacy is the idea that Christian beliefs and doctrines, churches, people are to be privileged above all others. And that privilege comes with the notion that all others are completely false and should hold no influence in our country. It's this supremacist ideology that is the foundation for something called Christian nationalism, which I'm sure you hear a lot about today if you pay attention to the news, which is essentially a theocratic government, a theocratic style of ruling. Now, if you have come out of the kind of same church spaces that I did growing up, you probably encountered this idea, and you may have even participated in this idea that we're right and everybody else is wrong. Your God is false, right? Like, I don't know if anybody heard that growing up. I did a million times. Of course, our ideas of God are completely true, right? But we're the only ones that actually have that. Anything outside of that narrow view of faith is labeled demonic, right? Satanic. It's evil, and by extension, then so are the people. This even extends to other denominations. In my home church that I grew up in, other Christian denominations would lead you astray. When I was graduating school and I decided where I was going to go to college, the Bible college that I picked was outside of my home church's denomination. And my pastor pulled me aside and was like, I'm really concerned about the school you're going to because they're going to lead you astray. I'm literally studying the Bible to be a pastor. And he's telling me that it's going to lead me astray. And do you know that literally there's two differences between the church I grew up in and the school I went to? Two differences. The school that I went to taught that you were supposed to have communion weekly. My home church was once a quarter. The school I went to was like you're baptized for salvation, and my home church was you were baptized after salvation. What? There was like, that's the big slippery slope to apostasy? Okay. Now, you can't possibly know this, but my son, who has staked out a claim on the couch, has a very strong sense of smell and taste. I mean, he's a bloodhound, okay? I'm not playing. When he was younger, he had terrible stomach issues. It turned out to be a lactose intolerance thing, but at the time we didn't realize it, and so he was getting really sick, and we were ending up in the ER, and he had IVs, and there was blood work and all these tests, and it was a year-long process of discovering that it's literally just lactose intolerance. And what was happening is that all the medications that they had him on, they were messing up his gut biome, and then that was causing him to be sick, and it was just this ongoing thing. And so he quickly realized what his safe foods were, right? So like anytime he began to get sick, he knew that he could always go back to this group and he would be okay. Like he could eat this and it would make him sick. Like, so anytime anything happened, it was just like, that's it. I'm not eating anything else. Now, there were a few times where there was like a granola bar that he really liked, right? So we would get him these granola bars because they were part of his safe foods. Well, every now and then, Walmart or Publix or whoever didn't have them. So we would get an off-brand. We wouldn't tell him, right? We wouldn't tell him. We would just give it to him. And the moment he handed it to him, it was like, this smells different. It's fine, buddy. It's the same thing. He's like, okay. And then he would taste it and be like, nope, that's not it. That's not good. Dude, it's literally the same ingredients. It's all the same stuff. It's just got a different sticker on the side. He knew it. He knew that it wasn't the correct recipe. That's how they see God. Yes, we're all Christians, but only we have the right recipe, right? It's that supremacist ideology that's behind us losing our lease. It's what's behind the laws that are being legislated. It's why the cult of personality surrounding MAGA. It's behind the colonization of the planet by Christian nations. Only we have the real truth and everything else is evil. I know that you say you worship the same God, but it's not the right recipe. Like, we've got it, right? And that ideology is so pervasive, so ingrained in our culture that we often don't recognize it internally or externally. And so, like, to start off this whole process, to begin the work of undoing that, we have to first acknowledge the history that has perpetuated Christian supremacy. Like, we have to confront the uncomfortable truths about the United States and understand that our faith has been misused to rationalize oppression. It was used to slaughter indigenous people as we settled, right? Settled as we discovered the United States. We use terms like manifest destiny to justify murder, the murder of innocents, while backing that up with verses found in the Old Testament. Not only did it allow for slavery, it perpetuated it, it defended it, it justified it. We use Bible verses to create and maintain patriarchy. Women were seen as just above property and were afforded no rights. It wasn't until the 1960s that women could open a bank account in their own name, which is insane to me. And what it did was it created systems where men had all the power and far too many men took advantage of that. And then we could go on to civil rights and queer rights, but if I did, we'd be here all day. And it's only when we confront these horrible truths about our past that we can begin to see the lingering effects in our current culture and in ourselves and do that hard work of dismantling it. So we recognize the harm that it's done, its existence, and then once we do that, that's when the difficult part starts, recognizing it within ourselves. In a letter to the church in the ancient city of Philippi, the early church leader Paul wrote this in Philippians chapter 2. We'll have it up here on the screen for you. Philippians chapter 2, starting verse 3 through 8, it says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or empty conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though he existed in the form of God," did I keep going? Okay. "Did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited." Go ahead. "But emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness. And being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Christian supremacy is about one thing and one thing only: ordering and maintaining power. It's about making sure that the right kind of Christians are the power brokers, the decision makers. But the way of Jesus, as seen in this 2,000-year-old hymn, is about emptying ourselves of any perceived power. Paul tells us to have the same mind of Christ and to take on the same attitude of Christ, which was to empty himself of power. When I was in my second year of ministry, it was this small rural church up in northern Missouri, like an hour from the Iowa border. I mean, it was real small, 5,000 people. It was a farming community. And I had the misfortune of working with a pastor by the name of Daryl. He was a retired master sergeant of a nuclear submarine. He was used to being in control, like the ultimate authority, and he ran the church the same way. Like, everybody loved him at first, but those of us that were on staff, he had this really booming voice. I mean, it was deep, and he had this bass voice, and he would use it to great effect. He was very intimidating. He would take advantage of that, and I was only in my mid-20s. Like, I hadn't even found, like, I didn't know who I was yet. Like, if we worked together now, there would be words had back and forth, right? But at the time, I'm still just a kid, and I don't know how to stand up for myself. There was this one particular time where he wanted me to go to church camp. Now, I don't have an issue going to church camp. I did it all the time. But it wasn't my week, and so I would go out during the day and visit stuff. He didn't want me going out during the day. He didn't want me taking up office hours. He wanted me to go on the off hours. You know, the time I'm supposed to spend with my wife and she's 21 now, but at the time she was only like 2, my 2-year-old. I'm supposed to go then, all right? And I didn't want to. So I wouldn't do it, but he just berated me for those things, smallest infractions. And he often bragged and laughed at the fact that he was gone to sea so long that when he would come home on leave, his youngest ones didn't recognize him. Like, that was a badge of honor for him. Daryl did not last very long. His style wore on people because they soon had enough of the power trips. I was never more thankful to see a pastor go than I was him. It was literally the worst 2 years of ministry I've ever had. Part of following the way of Jesus is ridding ourselves of the want for power. You cannot love and structure power within like Daryl would. The two are oil and water. When Paul talks about taking on the mind of Christ, it's about emptying ourselves of that need for power. You can't serve others and desire power. So if you see that in yourself, you have to do the intentional work of like just turning that over. You'll notice that the verses said he humbled himself. Now, what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to misread that and think that we're teaching or saying that you have to think less of yourself or that you have to think of yourself less. I think it's about recognizing the roles needed in each situation and how we fit into those scenarios, right? It's not wrong to lead. It's not wrong to want to lead. It is wrong to force your way into that position and then hoard whatever authority comes with that leadership role, right? If you see that in yourself, do the work of laying that down. If you see it in others, specifically in pastors or politicians claiming Christ, run. They're nothing but cult leaders. Now, once we've recognized those things within ourselves, we start the process of exposing them and dealing with them. And I don't think that ever truly ends. I think that's a lifelong process that we begin to see the damage they do in our world. In John's account of Jesus' life, in chapter 18, we see that Jesus has been arrested. He's brought before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. There's a back and forth between the two of them as Pilate kind of interrogates Jesus a little bit. And during that exchange, Jesus says something very interesting. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." And then he goes on to say in verse 40, he says this. They shouted, well, he doesn't say this, the crowd, Pilate brings Jesus out before the crowd, says, "Hey, I don't find any fault in him." And what did they yell? They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Now, just FYI, there is no historical evidence for any Roman official having a habit or tradition of releasing a prisoner for anything, just randomly. There's no historical evidence for them doing this during the Passover or to appease the Jews of any kind. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The author is using a rhetorical device to tell a story. He's trying to prove a point. The crowd wanted someone that would violently take power rather than somebody that rejected earthly power. The people of God rejected Jesus and screamed for an insurrectionist. Does that sound familiar? Because we haven't changed much. Christians today still reject the historical Jesus for snake oil salesmen that violently take power. The rejection of Christ for the power of supremacy fractures our world and our communities. It creates and perpetuates an us versus them mentality. The way of supremacy dehumanizes our neighbor. It's what allows state governments, to put up razor wire and not bat an eye when infants drowned. It's what allows for the slaughtering of thousands of innocents, of children in the Middle East. It's what creates the systematic sins that Jesus spent so much time calling out and fighting against. Christian supremacy is the reason that our state government does not care if it harms or erases our queer siblings and our neighbors of color. It is the centering of power around a Christ figure, but has nothing to do with the historical Jesus. And just so that you understand that, let me repeat that again. Christian supremacy is about centering power around a Christ figure, but has absolutely nothing to do with the historical Jesus. And I think the question that we have to answer for us is, what do we do about it? Right? What's our response? I mean, we're doing all this work and all this stuff is happening, but what's our response? Now, before I jump into that, I just want to tell you that I'm not dictating this to anybody. Like, this is not the answer. This is my response to everything that's going on, okay? And my hope is that, maybe it's helpful to you, right? And maybe it's just like, oh yeah, no, that does make perfect sense for me. If not, then I'm hoping that it's a jumping off point. It's a launching point for how you can respond to these things. When I walk into this room and I sit in these chairs, I want it to remind me that it is because of who we are and where we stand that we're here. Pastor Stan Mitchell in Grace Point Church in Nashville, we've talked about this before, this quote. Can you go ahead and show that? Yeah. If you call yourself an ally to a group of people and you aren't getting hit by the same stones, hitting by the stones being thrown at them, then you aren't standing close enough. That's why we're here. There's no other reason. We chose a different way, a different path, one that empties itself of power and the structuring of power, and that action calls us to stand in solidarity with the marginalized. We're here because we, as a faith community, rejected Christian supremacist ideology. And if I may, I'd like to be really vulnerable for a moment. Like you haven't seen that before. That was a welcome break. Thank you. I have really struggled with anger this week. I mean, really angry. And I kind of touched on it 2 weeks ago, but I hate that we were forced to move. I hate it. This week, coming up here and trying to put all this stuff back together, and we got enough done for today, and but that's it. We've got a whole lot more to do to go forward. But I spent I spent a lot of time under my breath saying certain things to our previous landlord. And just feeling, and it was a bitter anger, you know what I mean? Like, and it is what it is. Like, I was just really bitter about it, right? And I don't know how to not, you know what I mean? Like, it just is. Recently, though, I had dinner with some friends, and we were talking about the move, and I mentioned that what really bothers me is, and I said it 2 weeks ago, what really bothers me is that the move is just another reminder for our queer friends that they aren't wanted. And they understood why Tori and I felt that way, but that's not how they saw it. They said the way that they saw it was that their church community loved them enough to give up all that they had worked for and packed up everything to move into a room so that they could still be part of the community. So for me, every time I walk in this room, every time I sit in these chairs, I want it to remind me of that we're here because we chose to stand close enough to people who stones are being thrown at. Let them take all of our stuff. Because we're not moving one freaking inch. The second reaction I want to have is anger. I do want some anger. Now, not the same bitter, get off my lawn, kid anger. You know what I mean? Like that I had mentioned earlier, right? But I want a holy, sacred anger, right? The same anger that caused Jesus to flip those tables and shut down the entire temple system. The same anger that caused Jesus to confront the hypocrisy of the day's religious leaders. The same anger that caused Jesus to weep over the city that he loved. That kind of anger doesn't consume. It motivates. It doesn't destroy. It refines. That's the anger that I want. An anger that sharpens our focus to love and to serve even harder than we did before. Like, I want to have the attitude of just like, oh, you think that just because we don't have a permanent space anymore that it's going to slow us down? Like, bro, you did us a favor. With the money that we're saving and who it's going to. The money that we're saving, imagine, and who we're not paying anymore. Imagine what we can do now. Imagine where this point will take us, how this is going to launch us into the next season of shift. Like, I think for us that we have to reject this idea of Christian supremacy here locally, but also in the highest of offices. Even if it costs us building after building after building, I would rather lose all of this 1,000,000 times than ever capitulate to the powers that be. Because kingdoms, they rise and they fall, but the way of Jesus, the way of love, never ceases. So, let us have the mind of Christ, right? That stood with the outcast, that stood with the marginalized. Anytime you saw humans drawing a line separating us and them, he always stepped over that line, joined them, and then invited others to join him. He confronted the corruption of the church, and he was willing to lose it all for the sake of love. Christian supremacy is a historical evil that has created and caused untold damage. For us, we have to look inward to find those supremacists, where those supremacist ideas have grown, and with intention, take on the mind of Christ to rid ourselves of those things. We have to look outward to acknowledge how Christian supremacy has fractured our culture. And then we have to be a part of the work to create better, healthier, more Jesus-like ways forward. And so for me, it's letting that anger that comes from this injustice empower me to love even more, to serve even more, to look more and more like Christ. And so if you're new, we end each week with a time of reflection. And we do that to take any emotion out of the moment and allow you time to breathe and time to process what we just talked about. So the band comes back up and they play quietly so it's not an awkward silence. And we find the light switches and turn down the lights just to kind of create. Yeah. It's those. Just to kind of create that sense of, see? It changed everything. Creating the mood. And what I'll do is I'm going to ask you a series of questions to kind of guide that process, and then I'll pray. And after I pray, for anyone that would like, we have a time where we take communion. Those little cups that are on your seats. For us, communion is a weekly reminder that Jesus was willing to die for the sake of love. That it was love that held him to that cross. That love defeated death and healed the brokenness within humanity. And it reminds us that we're called to live in that same kind of love. So my first question for you today is this. What emotions came to the surface? What is your body trying to tell you right now? What are you hearing from the Spirit? During the time of the talk, did you recognize any of that supremacist ideology within your thinking or belief system? And if so, can you name them? Were you able to recognize this supremacist ideology externally? What came to mind when we were talking about that? And then how was that Antichrist? The last question I have for you is this. What concrete steps do you need to take to begin the work of dismantling this harmful belief system? Let's pray. God, in the margins, we thank you for today. Thank you for this space. Thank you for Westminster. I'm so grateful for their heart and how our shared values will make each other better. As we talk through this idea, I pray that we create the internal space to feel what we need to feel, and so that we can move forward in the healthiest way possible. Spirit, open our eyes to see where these evil ideas have taken root in our own hearts. Expose them to your light and help us to be rid of the attitudes that come with it. Open our eyes to see where these evil ideas have taken root in our world. Give us the strength to be part of the healing of the fractures this evil creates. And we thank you for the example of Jesus. Let us follow Christ's path and not the counterfeits of our age. Bring comfort to the afflicted, heal the broken, and free the chained. In your name, amen.